If the biblical flood wiped out all forms of life, how do we explain the reappearance of giants on Earth? Tribes of colossal stature in Canaan, centuries after the flood, point to a deliberate gap in the historical narrative. This contradiction has revealed theologians and archaeologists unable to justify the continuation of the Nephilim lineage. The official account states that only 8 souls boarded that wooden vessel and escaped from the waters. However, ancient records from multiple civilizations suggest that Noah was not the only one warned of the disaster. Consider for a moment that the secret of the cataclysm leaked to those who should never have survived. The fallen angels, progenitors of the Nephilim, mastered astronomy and meteorology at a supernatural level. It is hard to believe that beings of such capability ignored the signs from the sky before the great storm arrived. The hypothesis of parallel arks suggests that other ships were built in secrecy by hybrid races. We are not talking about sacred vessels, but about technological constructions designed to withstand the fury of the flood. The Sumerian tablets make it clear that Enki warned Ziusudra, but they also point to other parallel warnings. If the sons of God descended to contaminate humanity, they undoubtedly sought to preserve their lineage at any cost. The text of Genesis also uses the expression "after that" to refer to the presence of giants in Canaan. That brief biblical expression opens the possibility that the divine sentence may not have been as absolute as we have been told. In Chinese cosmology, the goddess Nuwa not only restores the heavens, but also saves lives during a great flood. Those traditions from the East tell of scattered pockets of resistance where humans and other creatures managed to survive. The traditions of the indigenous peoples of the Americas describe giants who fled to the mountaintops to escape the water. Geology confirms deposits of marine sediments on high peaks, evidence that water rose up to there. But could it be that some of those peaks hide sealed caverns capable of withstanding the pressure of the ocean? Colossal underground cities like Derinkuyu in Turkey demonstrate that ancient engineering reached unexpected levels. There is a possibility that those excavated fortresses were not shelters against air attacks, but against the Great Flood. The Nephilim, endowed with exceptional strength and inherited technology, could have burrowed to unimaginable depths underground. If a cave is sealed with the correct pressure, it is possible to survive while the ocean devours the entire surface. This would explain why chronicles of giants emerge almost simultaneously in regions with no contact between them. The Titans of the Greek world and the Jotun of the Norse sagas share traits that are too similar to be a coincidence. It does not seem to be a mythical creation, but rather the collective and traumatized memory of beings that reappeared after the flood. The Hebrew scriptures mention the Anakim and the Rephaim as lineages of giants who occupied the Promised Land. Moses and Joshua had to fight against those descendants, which confirms that the flood did not eliminate their genetic heritage. Some apocryphal texts indicate that the fallen angels instructed their offspring in the art of building sealed shelters. Noah built his ark guided by faith, while the Nephilim built theirs driven by terror and dark knowledge. Noah's ark sailed sheltered by the divine, while the other dark vessels only withstood the fury of the water. It is likely that many of those ships in the darkness were pulverized by the brutal violence of the water during the chaos. But with just one group of those hybrid beings having survived, it would have been enough to reintroduce the giant gene. The myth of Og, monarch of Bashan, recounts that this survivor traveled clinging to the exterior roof of Noah's Ark. Although it sounds like a rabbinical legend, that story hides the desperate attempt to make sense of something: its survival. Upon examining the cuneiform tablets, we see that the Anunnaki lament the destruction, but track possible survivors. The tension between Enlil, who supported extermination, and Enki, who preferred to save, reflects an ancient dispute of interests. It is plausible that Enki, or his equivalents, provided escape plans to groups other than Noah's lineage. The Book of Enoch details the despair of the Watchers in light of the condemnation that weighed upon their heads. They did not await their end with resignation. They used all their forbidden knowledge to escape the fate that awaited them. The megalithic structures that persist today could be the remnants of those shelters of ancestral technology. Blocks weighing hundreds of tons, fitted with millimeter precision, could not have been the work of mere wandering shepherds. These structures challenge our understanding of the past and point to a force that builds exceptional physical capabilities. In the Andes, the traditions surrounding Viracocha tell of giants transformed into stone for defying the will of the Creator. Significantly, those same Andean narratives are linked to a purifying flood that washed the earth of sins. The universal presence of the flood myth proves that the event truly occurred, and also that there were real survivors. If only Noah had survived, all cultures would be branches of his lineage, and there would be no memory of the others. However, indigenous peoples of North America report the existence of a race of white giants that already inhabited those lands. Those beings were portrayed as violent, cannibalistic, and bearers of a surprisingly sophisticated material culture. The Lovelock Cave in Nevada has provided remains of large humanoids that contradict the official history. Could these be the heirs of those who took refuge in the depths of the mountains of the American continent? The independent survival hypothesis holds that the land was repopulated from multiple distinct geographical points. This refutes the classical dogma, but fits better with the physical and cultural evidence spread across the globe. The flood was conceived to eradicate the genetic corruption that the fallen angels had sown in humanity. If the goal was to eliminate hybrid DNA, the survival of the Nephilim represents a partial failure of that divine purpose. Or perhaps it represents a permanent trial imposed on humanity, forced to confront darkness in every era. Gnostic texts assert that the demiurge lacks absolute control over creation and that chaos always finds cracks. Thinking that Noah was sailing a global ocean while dark vessels also navigated around him is chilling. Imagine the patriarch in his solitude, believing he is the only living man, unaware that evil was also lurking nearby. That perspective transforms the flood narrative into a survival thriller, where water is not the only enemy. The real danger was those who had poisoned the land and who now fought relentlessly to avoid disappearing. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, Utnapishtim conquers immortality by surviving the flood, a fate different from that of Noah. Those divergences in the central narrative are signs that the same event was experienced in very different ways. The Vedic writings recount how Manu was rescued by a divine fish that warned him in advance of the Great Flood. In every corner of the planet, someone received a warning signal, and it did not always emanate from the same supreme divine source. If the fallen angels mastered the manipulation of matter, they could have generated hermetic survival chambers. The so-called crystal vaults that appear in certain Atlantean myths could very well refer to those submerged shelters. It is not absurd to imagine a pre-flood civilization with technical knowledge that we would today classify directly as magic. The Book of Wisdom of Solomon alludes to the fact that the hope of the world clung to a single raft, in the singular. However, the original Hebrew text allows for broader interpretations regarding the true identity of those so-called heroes. Giants reappear in cities like Gath, Ashdod, and Gaza, and this fact is recorded in the biblical chronicles themselves. Goliath was not a fortuitous genetic mutation, but the result of a lineage that had been preserved intact for centuries. To maintain that lineage, both female and male members of the Nephilim race had to cross the flood barrier. Genetics requires a critical mass of individuals to prevent inbreeding from destroying the race in a few generations. Therefore, it is not just one or two escapees, but entire communities that manage to remain isolated. The mountain ranges of the Caucasus and the slopes of Mount Hermon are recurring candidates as refuges from that era. Mount Hermon is precisely the place where the Book of Enoch locates the original descent of the Watchers to the earth. From a strategic point of view, it made sense for them to return to their original enclave to protect themselves from the waters. The cave systems in that area are vast, and much of them remains unexplored to this day. In the darkness of those galleries, they could wait for months or even years until the waters receded enough. Upon emerging, they found a purified world, depopulated and ready to be dominated again through brute force. But they also encountered the heirs of Noah, who were beginning to repopulate the earth under the protection of the new covenant. The inevitable clash between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent resumed almost immediately. The extermination campaigns of the Old Testament take on a new dimension under this disturbing interpretation. They were not conflicts over land, but purging missions to conclude what the waters of the flood could not finish. Every time Israel took a territory and encountered giants, the heavenly mandate was complete and total eradication. This indicates that God perceived the presence of that corrupted genetic code and ordered its removal by the sword. The theory of multiple arks clarifies why primordial evil and corruption seem not to have died with the water. The myth of the seven sages who restored civilization in Mesopotamia after the flood is another revealing element. Those beings, called Apkallu, are depicted as hybrids of man and fish, suggesting a real aquatic survival. Perhaps certain fallen angels did not require vessels, as they adapted to the marine environment to survive the flood. The myths of mermaids and tritons could be blurred memories of those entities during the months of total flooding. If the Watchers could mutate their form, adapting to the pressure of the ocean depths would not be impossible for them. This leads us to wonder if the depths of the current ocean still harbor descendants of those ancient creatures. Returning to the surface, the Cyclopean architecture of Baalbek showcases stone blocks that no current machine can move. The Baalbek platform must have been erected before the flood or immediately after by beings of extraordinary power. The erosion seen on some of those stones suggests an age that completely breaks the accepted historical chronology. If those structures withstood being submerged, they later acted as foundations on which the survivors rebuilt. The persistence of the cult of giant gods in antiquity reflects the physical and tangible presence of those beings. The populations did not worship idols out of habit, but rather due to the panic instilled by those flesh and blood rulers. Norse mythology is precise in stating that the ice giants survived through the blood of Ymir. Ymir symbolizes primordial chaos, and his blood signifies the flood that nearly wiped out everyone except Bergelmir's lineage. Bergelmir and his companion escaped in a luder, a term that designates a hollow box or boat notably similar to an ark. Once again, the scheme repeats itself, a couple of giants fleeing with the specific purpose of perpetuating their opposing race. Is it pure coincidence that Scandinavians, Sumerians, and Hebrews share the same plot with different names in the roles? The most reasonable conclusion is that several groups tried to escape, and some succeeded in different corners of the world. This split human history into two branches: the progeny of Noah and the survivors of the ancient corrupt order. The hidden history of humanity is the perpetual struggle between these two factions for absolute dominance over the world. The heirs of the Nephilim established themselves as kings and lords, claiming divine worship as if they were demigods. They promoted the construction of enormous towers and ziggurats to once again challenge the authority of the heavens. The Tower of Babel was the first attempt to unify these scattered forces under a single rebellious and centralized command. Nimrod, characterized as a mighty hunter, is often associated with the recovery of anti-deluvian knowledge. Certain traditions claim that he found stone slabs where the darkest secrets of the Watchers had been inscribed. If that knowledge survived, it was because someone took on the task of protecting it from the annihilating power of the flood. The notion of anti-deluvian libraries hidden in chambers underground is a recurring theme in esoteric thought. The pyramids of Egypt and America are considered by many as time capsules built to withstand catastrophes. If their builders had foreseen the flood, the pyramids would have been the most logical place to safeguard their legacy. Noah preserved the biological life of the earth, while others were determined to save the technology and knowledge of the Golden Age. That dichotomy explains the dizzying advancement of humanity in Mesopotamia and Egypt shortly after the flood receded. There was no gradual evolution from carved stone. There was a sudden eruption of civilization and elaborate writing. That accelerated restart indicates that the survivors carried with them the complete manual of the world before the flood. But the cost of that knowledge was the reimplantation of idolatry, ritual sacrifice, and war as a way of life. The giants were not only notable for their size, but also for their insatiable hunger for power, domination, and limitless chaos. Celtic traditions about the Fomorians depict a race of giants that emerged from the sea to subjugate the peoples. Always the sea, always the water, as the starting point of those beings who return to claim what they consider their own. The connection between the Nephilim and the ocean is much denser than what a quick reading of the Bible might suggest. The abyss often appears as the prison destined for those beings, a physical and spiritual enclave in the depths. Perhaps the flood was not meant to merely exterminate them, but to trap them in a dimension of water and darkness with no return. And those who managed to stay on the surface or in caves were the fugitives from that aquatic, planetary prison. The geology of the Tibetan plateau also holds clues about survivors taking refuge in the most remote heights. In remote monasteries, there are manuscripts that describe ancient eras and monarchs whose height exceeded 5 meters. Official science dismisses those accounts as fantastical, but the bones found sometimes tell a very different story. The Smithsonian has been implicated in various conspiracy theories about hiding giant skeletons discovered in mounds. If confirmed, that would be the material proof that the hypothesis of parallel arks is grounded in reality. Suppressing that truth is necessary to uphold the narrative of a linear, clean, and unimpeded human evolution. Accepting the existence of giants would imply validating ancient texts and the intervention of non-human entities. The theory of multiple arks does not diminish Noah's greatness. It simply expands the framework of the cosmic conflict that occurred. It shows that Noah's salvation was a miracle sustained amidst a massive effort of parallel survival. Evil is persistent and seeks cracks in any decree to perpetuate itself throughout the centuries and all eras. The famous men of antiquity did not fade away in silence. They fought extinction with all their fierceness. Their descendants lived among us, founded empires, and it is possible that their lineages persist hidden within the elite. Blood does not lie, and recessive genetic traits can manifest unexpectedly after many generations. But beyond the DNA, it is the philosophy of the Nephilim that persists and continued to grow after the cataclysm of the flood. The insurrection against the natural order and the yearning for divinity through technology constitute its direct legacy. Today we do not see 3-meter giants in the streets, but we do observe their structures of power perfectly intact. The contemporary obsession with rewriting the human genome could be the echo of that ancient contamination of the flesh. We are closing the cycle and returning to the times of Noah, exactly as the ancient sacred texts announced. The possibility that not everyone perished in the flood transforms our understanding of both the past and the future. It drives us to view mountains and oceans not just as landscapes, but as ancient, unresolved battlefields. Each deep cave could have been a rock ark, each isolated peak a forbidden bastion where life refused to yield. History is written by the victors, but those from the defeated side left their marks etched in the ancient stone. Brands that we have tried to ignore, bury, or categorize as anomalies to evade a truth that is too uncomfortable. The truth is that we do not inhabit this planet alone, and we never have since those remote and dark primordial days. The account of the flood is infinitely more complex, dark, and fascinating than the simplified version that was passed down to us. In the end, the waters receded, the land dried up, and 2 opposing lineages set out to walk under the renewed sun. One sought redemption and life. The other craved revenge and dominion over a new and defenseless humanity. That silent war has shaped every significant event in our history, from Sumeria to the present day. Investigating these enigmas is not mere intellectual curiosity. It is an obligation to understand who we are and what we face. The stones cry out what history silences, and the bones of the giants are silent witnesses to the great deception. How many more secrets lie buried under the mud of millennia, waiting for someone to bring them to light? Reality surpasses fiction because fiction requires coherence, while true history is full of chaos. Keep your eyes wide open, for the footprints of the ancient giant kings are scattered all over the world. Subscribe now to continue uncovering the forbidden history that certain powers don't want you to know.